I love recording with just nothing happening. It's great.
It's the perfect way to start a video.
Oh yeah, just lots of silence. It's funny. Every time I've had like cans of beer out here, whenever we're doing this, everyone's like, "Hey, wait, hold on a second." Hold the beer can up, go, like, you know how many start that way? But it's still cool. I like hearing it.
I like the one where you had to like put the box down a little bit lower because it was blocking the view.
Which one was that?
There was one there. I scrolled pretty far back into your feed, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, go to this show. Where's my dream key? I need that. Here it is. Copy. I thought I put this in yesterday. We're live.
We are.
We are live now.
Hello.
Hello. I'm also going to pull it up on the thing here because
Just
I don't
let you
trust
work
it.
Your magic.
I just want to see that it's working. That's all.
Better double check.
Well,
Issues
we're just
usually
gonna.
come in threes, and we've only hit our first one. So.
I've had like 5 things break.
Oh,
so.
okay. Never mind. We're past our quota. That's good.
Oh yeah. So now the cameras are actually on instead of just like silence and and that placeholder image. So hey, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Happy winter, although it seems to be almost over.
Oh gosh, don't jinx it. I don't know if you should have said that.
Hey, my alley here got completely ignored, which I was happy for.
Why?
Except because we kind of had like enough vehicles on it, like just driving on it and keeping the snow down. But then as soon as we didn't need it anymore and it started melting, that's when the plow came through like 7 in the morning and just created these massive ice boulders blocking in all the vehicles all the way up and down the alley.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it was.
I can't back out of my my little cul-de-sac without potentially hitting a car because it's just visually you can't see past the snowbank down the street.
Oh man,
and it's wonderful. But yeah, I like winter, but not in such amounts.
Not in excess
No.
as it is.
No, not that much.
Oh man. Yeah. Wait. Which area do you live in? You live over by Gyro, right?
Yeah, close. Pandosy area.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a walk to Gyro. It's fantastic, honestly. I shouldn't complain. First world problems. Oh my gosh, the snowbank's too high because the snowplow came by. Yeah, no, I'm not.
Well, it's kind of inconvenient when you're anticipating that, okay, if I get up, I go outside 15 minutes before, I can turn on the car, get it warmed up, shove out the whole street's blocked in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's just fantastic. When you're trying to get out of your little stall and your tires are just spinning, so you got to dig into the snow a little bit to get traction. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, a few times I've only been able to get out of my the alley into the street because the snowplow is just blocking it all in. Yeah. If I have like a certain amount of momentum.
Yes.
And I can break through the ice wall.
And then you just really, really hope that there's nobody coming your way.
Yeah, it's kind of a gamble sometimes. Just jam on the brakes. Okay, let's try this again. Back up, get a little bit more momentum again.
Full on Jesus, take the wheel. Yep.
Oh, it's great. So tell me about what you have been doing for the last while. Because the last time I spoke with you, I think we had sushi.
Yes, that's true.
And it was windy as. By the way, you can swear all we want on here.
Okay, fantastic. Great.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
But you were telling me about, or we started talking a little bit about some of the differences between being in corporate world versus nonprofit. Because I think it was recently from then that you'd begun your job at the nonprofit. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the women's shelter, absolutely. Yeah, I think, oh gosh, it's been a while. So many things have happened since then. It's a little bit of a blur, of course. But yeah, I think that our conversation started around just how much it feels almost like a different world coming from a corporate background and then plopping yourself into a nonprofit. And I've been exposed to nonprofit dynamics for a while now. I think my journey kind of started with the Red Cross way back when they helped me after my apartment caught fire.
Oh,
Yeah,
what?
yes. Yeah,
wait. When was that?
Oh gosh, I was still. I was manager at the Columbia Bottle Depot up in Rutland, and my family and I, we were just tenants. Gosh, what year was it? maybe 2012, 2013. It's been a while. And our apartment building caught fire, and we thought we were going to be able to go back in a couple of days because it was way over on the other side of the building. We could section that part off.
Was that the building that blew up because of the propane tank?
No, it was the same year though. Yeah, which is...
My aunt lived like 2 blocks away from there, and
God.
she got rid of her propane tank.
Oh yeah,
immediately
no,
after
a
that
lot
happened.
of people did. Trust me. Yeah, all of a sudden, the strata and the bylaws made sense. But yeah,
wait,
no.
propane tank bylaws?
Yeah, there are. Sometimes there's that. There's strata usually is the one who will say no propane tanks on your balcony. Because of that reason, they'll also say things like no live Christmas trees in your condos because they're a fire hazard during Christmas. You can only have plastic ones, things like that. So obviously, it ruins the fun a little bit. But I mean,
Yeah, but that's what stratas are for. Stratas are to make you question why you bought.
Yes. Yes,
because it's just such a good idea. If you talk to any real estate agents, like buy, it's a good thing. Stratas are that one thing. It's like, we need to create a devil on this shoulder. Let's name it Strata.
What's the antithesis to that, though? What's the angel? I don't think there is one.
Homeowner. Your property value goes up every year, like by double of what you paid the previous
I guess that
year
makes
or whatever.
sense. Yeah, and then Strata puts a levy on, and you're broke again. But but yeah, my apartment caught fire. We didn't have any tenants insurance, and we thought we were gonna be able to go back in after 3 days, but that didn't happen. And by that point, because of that other building that exploded, and a couple of other people who were displaced, there were no rental properties anywhere in town. Middle of summer, nobody's looking. My family was basically homeless, and then somebody said go to the Red Cross. And I had at that point, probably to a certain extent because I grew up in Vancouver, there's very many nonprofits that I've witnessed there who maybe weren't as ethical as they should have been. I had a very big skepticism for what nonprofits do, and how much they actually help. So I was definitely a little bit hesitant to think and get my hopes up that they could actually help, but they helped dramatically, and it was one of the first times that I actually felt a community come together. I always felt it a little bit, coming from a big city and then moving to a place like Kelowna, that you don't really expect that a sense of community is still something that you can find. But coming to a place like this, it was a breath of fresh air for sure, which kind of got me down the path of thinking, okay, if people can be motivated to come like this together and basically work for free, because at that point I think 87% of the Red Cross staff was volunteer based. What is it in the human psyche that pushes them along to do some pretty tough stuff, Yeah, okay, you start in emergency services helping somebody out with a local apartment fire, but I mean, these people went down to help after Hurricane Katrina. They go to war zones. They go everywhere around the world, for free, to just on their own time, utilizing their own skill set. And that was something that, in my experience thus far, I hadn't really seen in the corporate world. So yeah, I kind of transitioned into that, thankfully, and I've merged the two in a way in my own world.
It's funny that you say that you were surprised to find the community here after moving from Vancouver, because almost anyone that I've spoken to who came from Vancouver to here said that they'd never really had any kind of community before. This is like that small town feel, like you walking by somebody and they smile at you, they wave to you. But if you walk around in downtown Vancouver or anywhere Vancouver for the most part, and you walk by someone else and they don't know who you are and you don't know who they are, you almost, like, you do everything but pretend that they're a ghost.
Yes.
Like, you don't acknowledge them. You don't get to know people in your area very much, like more like in suburb areas.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like I don't really know Vancouver to be that. So like it's kind of weird to hear that, like, you're surprised that it was there, but you're surprised to find it here.
I think I was just surprised because I've always lived in a big city, and I just, when you're surrounded by a certain type of subculture, you don't expect to find anything different anywhere else, right? When you're not exposed to what community actually feels like, then you don't really know what it is that you're looking for. And it was only when I could actually see that stark difference that I could recognize it as, oh, this is what they're talking about. I always thought that it was something lost to previous generations, maybe. I do have to say that to a certain extent, being a little bit of a city slicker at heart still, what you're describing in terms of that lack of familiarity between people when you're living in a big city, to a certain extent, sometimes I miss that. Because
it's kind of nice, isn't it? Like to walk around anonymously.
There's a little bit of a beauty in being in a big city surrounded by millions of people and being able to feel entirely and completely alone. You know, and it sounds horrible, but it's a little bit of an indescribable feeling where you can walk down the street and nobody gives a crap about you.
Well, it's cool because if you don't want people to know you or to be in your business or whatever, then yeah it's kind of nice. And then if you do want to be around people that you know of, you know, not everyone does this, but for the most part, you kind of find your little community, you find your group of people that become your tribe.
You do. You definitely do. And it's something that you can still access in larger cities as well. I just also think that because the choices are almost endless, the stability of that also kind of decreases a little bit in a big city. You know, it's very easy to switch over to something else because there's just this plethora of opportunity, whereas in a smaller little tribe, so to speak, you know, you definitely appreciate what you have a lot more because you know how precious it is. And that's something that I've even seen in terms of working with nonprofits and even corporations and businesses and social enterprises in the Kelowna community. There is a very, very distinct support local culture here, which is very helpful, very supportive, and it's one of the things that, in my perspective, makes us pretty resilient as a community. I mean, even looking at the last couple of years, there's been lots of businesses that obviously have been very hard hit, but when you take a look at the rest of the world, I mean, we've managed to pivot pretty well, especially in terms of nonprofits, and that's something that nonprofits are very well known for, because they're always under the gun. You know, it's not like a business or a corporation where you can sit down and, you know, you find what works and you just kind of keep going with it, and then you grow on whatever it is that you did last year, and you know, you make it work. Nonprofits are at the whim. Classic, you know, like registered charitable nonprofits are very much at the whim of everything from, you know, politics to where the next funding source is going to come from. You can't really build, apart from a donor base, you can't really build your clientele, so to speak, the way that you can with a business.
Do you like working in those kind of constraints? Because like I've heard of the analogy of like people will play like within the area that they know they can play within. Mm-hmm. So like if you put a playground in to a field and there's no fence, the kids kind of stay close to the playground, but then like if you put up constraints and walls and fences, they'll play all the way to the fences. True. And sometimes up the fences as well.
True. Yes.
So I suppose like in a corporation where some companies will have a very strict like we do this, and so you have like a very narrow playing field, and then that can move around. But then there'll be like some bigger companies that, you know, they kind of do everything or a lot of stuff, and but then in a nonprofit you have a very small hallway that you can move within, like as you're going forward. Like do you like that kind of constraint, or is it more frustrating than it is inspiring?
It depends on the day. One of the things that you never want to, what you're describing for a nonprofit would be akin to mission drift. Right? You have the social cause that you're focused on, and you can sometimes find yourself in a situation as, you know, a fund development professional, trying to, you know, fit a square peg into a round hole. And you try to make sure that the way that you're describing what it is that you do fits the funder more than it is actually describing what it is that you do, and that's something that personally I try to stay away from as much as possible. But I mean, working for, you know, currently an organization like the Women's Shelter, I have it easy to a certain extent. You know, you hear Kelowna Women's Shelter, I don't really have to necessarily describe what it is that we do. We're in Kelowna and we're a women's shelter. You know, as much as there are lots of assumptions and, you know, stigmas and stereotypes that come along with people hearing those phrases, and they have an idea of what that looks like, which might not be realistic. At the base core, they know what it is that we do. Whereas, the antithesis of that kind of emergency services work that I'm doing right now versus previously working for something like the YMCA of Okanagan. That takes a lot of explaining and a lot of working to try to get people's attention to understand what the YMCA of Okanagan does, because it's not that clear cut. So you're with the emergency services now? With
the
we
shelter,
were considered the women's.
Before you were with the YMCA.
Before I was with the YMCA, and that was it's one of the things when you talk about constraints. One of the things that I am slightly frustrated with when it comes to the classic nonprofit structure is that your hands are tied to a certain extent every year with not just where you're going to be sourcing your funding from, but also how quickly you're going to utilize it. And, nonprofits cannot utilize some of those business tactics. We can't hold revenue unless it's designated for something very specific. And we have to have board approval for that and put it into a separate reserve. And, you are starting from scratch over and over again. So in that sense, no, I don't like the constraints that puts on.
Sounds like an entrepreneur startup person's dream.
To a
that
certain
thing
extent,
you did back when you worked your ass off and worked like 90 hours a week?
You do that every
week to
year.
get this thing started.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
daily here.
Yes.
Welcome to the team.
Absolutely. And that's why, to a certain extent, I would say that nonprofits are extremely well poised and well positioned to be able to teach the corporate world about what resilience really looks like.
Do you find though that almost makes people bitter that they keep on having to start over and over,
Absolutely.
like the long timers?
Absolutely, yes. I often do hear from some colleagues. It's frustrating when you spend so much time explaining why your cause is important. If my cause was important last year, why is it not important this year? Or why do I have to keep explaining to you why this cause is important? There's a nice little medium that I personally like to work in. It's away from the corporate, get as much money for the CEO type structure, but it's not as constrained as the nonprofit. And to me, that's a social enterprise. And I see a lot of nonprofits delving and dipping their toes into something like that. And it works really well. It merges the social focus of a nonprofit with kind of those business tactics that you would see in a corporation, and it merges it in the middle.
So explain it for a dummy like me. A social enterprise, like it sounds like at surface value like a company with the end goal result that a nonprofit would have.
There you go. That's perfect. That's exactly what it is. So it's
Oops.
No,
okay.
that's exactly what it is, and I can give a couple examples just from personal experience.
Please do.
The Kelowna Women's Shelter is a registered charitable nonprofit. The shelter itself, the programs itself, they're all fully funded through fundraising. But we also operate a thrift store. So that thrift store, people will donate their clothing, their household items, anything that we can sell, gently used items, and those donations will then get put on the floor and we sell them. We don't just sell them to the general public. We have a voucher program that ends up helping the women who access our services be able to shop there for free as well as partner with other community agencies like the Interior Health, CMHA, John Howard Society, a lot of local other nonprofits utilize that service as well. But at the end of the day, that is something that is structured like a full-on business. It's a shop. And that is a prime example of what a social enterprise is. You have expenses. Those have to get covered first. You get as much staff as is necessary. You pay your lease, you pay your utilities, you pay for whatever renovations you need to have done. And then all of the surplus after that, you are able to funnel back into whatever social cause it is that you're focused on. And that's something that I think works really well, because then you don't necessarily have to worry about, okay, a lot of funders don't actually want to fund staff. And for an organization, for example, like the Kelowna Women's Shelter, staff is what we do.
Well, isn't staff like the most expensive cost of any business?
Absolutely, but it's
there's probably a couple
unfortunately
businesses that there's like 5 people running it, and they have much more expensive things than them.
Absolutely. Yes. But I think that sometimes for funders, and this is changing for sure, especially in the local community, I think that that they're seeing the value of people finally. But sometimes certain funders don't want to fund staff. They don't want their money to go towards wages because there's still this hesitation that I find very, very interesting when I come across it in specific donors and funders. They're willing to give me money, but they still have skepticism behind what it is that they think that I'm going to use it for.
Well, it's not as sexy either. Like the ball galas, like the fundraisers.
Yes.
Like I've been to a lot of those, and like for like running like the technical side of them. And there's one they were talking. There was the Vernon Jubilee Hospital, and their big thing they were talking about. This was at like Predator Ridge, so like the hoity-toities of the valley were there, and they were tying one on for the night.
Golf tournaments. Yep.
Oh yeah, it was exactly what you think it was. Like they had the meal was preceded by basically how the games went and like who scored the highest or the lowest or whatever it was, and
it's a fun time.
And they were celebrating the new like MRI machines and this crazy scanner thing. It's like we're the only ones between Calgary and Vancouver that has this thing. Like our hospital is getting awesome, and there was no mention that I remember of them saying, "Oh, and by the way, a lot of your funding are going to keep the staff like fed, and their cars are going to be able to drive, and their clothes will get cleaned, and they won't go crazy because they'll be able to do things that in their spare time to keep them human, and your funding also helps that." Like that wasn't mentioned because it just doesn't have the same kind of appeal.
No, absolutely not. And unfortunately, the reality is you're probably going to lose some funders that way as well. To me personally, ethically speaking, that's not something I'm ever going to hide. I'm going to tell you exactly where your money is going to go. In fact, if any donor calls me up and says, "Where is my money going?" I can tell them exactly where and how much. And it's a matter of educating the funder and the public in general about why it's still important to pay for staff.
Do they actually call up very much and be like, "Where does my money go? Where'd it go?"
They usually ask before they give the money, which is smart. But
that's smart.
Right? And that is fine. I will always honor that. But there's an interesting social expectation that somebody in my position shouldn't be paid.
Well, then who does the work?
I think that a lot of donors do think that it should be volunteer based, and I think it comes down to potentially not understanding quite how much effort, work, and education goes into doing the job itself. And again, that is just one of the uphill battles that nonprofits can sometimes face. There's models, and again, that's why I keep going back to the social enterprise part. There's models that you can apply in order to get around that, so that you can satisfy the donor and also make sure that your staff are putting food on the table and paying their bills and keeping a roof above their head. I think one of the benefits that I had was early on in my career being able to experience working for the YMCA of Okanagan again. And their model isn't quite social enterprise-esque, but it could fall under that category. Their entire structure is the gym memberships pay for all administrative expenses. So all staff wages came from the gym memberships or any sort of courses, anything that was generally open to the public. But then the nonprofit side was to fund preventative programs. Now, holy hell, did I learn how to describe a program that nobody has ever thought of or wrapped their head around well to the general public, because prevention also isn't very sexy. When you don't see, like sad kittens and puppies like you do with the SPCA, it's hard to pull at the heartstrings for donors when something hasn't happened yet. Right? So that was definitely a challenge. But I learned, and I had some very great mentors between, my boss Rhonda and my CEO Sharon. I mean, they were very, very willing to help my growth within the organization, and it's something that I'll eternally be grateful to them for taking a chance on somebody who had zero nonprofit background. Well, not zero. I worked with the Red Cross, but nothing to that extent. Nothing to the extent of fundraising. You know, I'm a numbers gal through and through, but nonprofit is an entirely different beast, and they definitely took a chance in hiring a young little me. Oh, I'm gonna do a good job. I'm gonna make a difference in the world.
Well, hey, as Aftertouch Audio here says in the comments, Spider-Man does whatever Spider-Man does. So, yeah, you're just doing your thing.
Yes.
Something I'm actually curious about. So I a couple years ago, and we did this Chelsea was involved in this one actually. We did this entirely in our spare time. Applied for funding, didn't get it. So it's kind of still been like back burner of like when we get around to it. It's been a while. But we shot a couple of friends and I. We shot all the footage for a documentary following a couple of people who are in a program. Well, some of they were all in various recovery houses at the time. Now they're moving on to doing other stuff. But we talked with them about like, so there was 2 guys and a girl, and the girl and the guy were, one of the guys and the girl, they were a couple, and they were talking about how difficult it can actually be to get into some of these shelters.
Yes.
Like the waiting lists are something else.
Yeah.
And this is a thing where if you are in need of a shelter, you really don't give a shit about what's in the way.
Yes.
You just know that there's stuff in the way and you need help today.
Yeah.
And you were told to come back in 6 months, and you're like, well, that doesn't help. So I will pretend to be like a group of people who's sitting here and is just not demanding an answer, but is curious about why is this the case?
Ooh, here we go.
So here we go.
Ooh, I like this.
I can hang on to Pickle Rick if you like. Here. She's gonna pass him over.
I might want to keep him close.
Oh, I'm just gonna put him here to be like my audience, or if you want him on your side there, then yeah, that's all good too.
Let's get Pickle Rick over there.
Pickle Rick. This is Pickle Rick. I'm gonna switch this over.
Oh, he's definitely gonna be a fun one to convince. There's a couple of things happening here.
And you get some Velcro for this little dude. Just like hang him up right here permanently. He'll just be like an audience.
Is he even in frame, or is he a little too low?
I think he's sort of in frame. Maybe blocked a little bit by the mic stand, but
that's fine.
You know, as soon as he speaks up, he'll get a better image.
So there's 2 things that are happening here in that scenario. The first one is capacity, and the second one is systemic issues that we don't have control over. So when I talk about capacity, again, it comes down to how much space do we have, how many beds, how many staff, and we once again come back to the whole, I don't want to fund a building and I don't want to fund staff. That's what's needed. That is the bread and butter of what it is that we do. Thankfully, the Kelowna Women's Shelter is in a position where we're actually expanding. We're going to be, for the first time in 40 years, we're going to be building a second site in the West Kelowna area, thankfully, due to some assistance primarily from the BC Society of Transition House, and then hopefully in another 3-ish years a third site in Kelowna.
So most of the sites are on this side of the bridge, and they're around the downtown area, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. So
and
confidential
is that on
locations.
Purpose?
Yes, in order to try to, make it as easy as possible. Try to keep it confidential, but at the same time also accessible. That's a very difficult line to try to maintain. There's many members of the community who know where the shelter is, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want them walking around it. So
yeah, that makes sense.
There's
especially if they're from the area, they have people in the area who still know them, and they're trying to get away from that life.
Right, exactly. So it's even just for their safety and comfort, you want to try to limit foot traffic as much as possible. This isn't Hotel Hilton when you walk in there. It's 8 rooms, double occupancy, pre-COVID. When people ask why don't they just...
Big damper on it, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, especially when you have children. I mean, I think that there's definitely, going off on a bit of a side tangent here, but there's this expectation that, why doesn't she just leave? There's a lot of stuff in the way. It's not comfortable. You're bunking with somebody that you don't know who also has their own demons to try to work through. Especially if you have children, that's going to be very difficult for them. It's not pleasant. We try to make it as homey as possible, but it's one of the reasons that we're very thankful for this expansion, because we're finally getting something that's purpose-built. Now, shelters, women's shelters specifically, when they started popping up primarily back in the 1980s. They were literally, as our shelter is right now, out of a house, and you just refurbish the house as best as you can to try to fit as many people in there as possible. So again, the first barrier is always capacity. One of the things that I've decided to actually put in our annual reports is how many people we turn away. Now that's not a sexy number, and there's always a little bit of debate about, you know, should you be talking about that? And yes, we should be talking about that.
That's a heavy point that would
Yeah.
really answer a few questions to some people, like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Check out this number.
Yeah. We are at capacity 365 days of the year, 24/7, at capacity all the time. We have so many women and children calling in that we're not able to maintain a wait list. I mean, that's just the reality of the issue. You know, and that's sad, because you feel a little bit like Sisyphus, always rolling that rock up the hill, and you know that you're never really going to get there. You know, you hope for it, and you're happy that you're, okay, we're going through this expansion, we're going to get more space, but it's also kind of sad that we need it. You know, that we're still at a place where we need more than 16 beds at a time.
Do you think that if you, by some chance of a miracle, were gifted a building that just was dropped here by helicopters and had a capacity for 200 women, each in their own room, do you think that it would still be enough? Or do you think that some people, no, that's a bad question. Do you think that everyone who could make use of it would make use of it? Or do you think that, like, if capacity weren't the issue, what would you think would be the next bottleneck?
Then at that point it would be systemic. Especially a lot of our primary focus is women and children. So when you start getting Ministry of Children and Families involved, the legal system, a lot of times the woman finds herself in a position where she has been financially not able to sustain herself, which doesn't help when it comes to custody. You know, not being able to have or afford a permanent place to live, you know, second stage and third stage housing where you can actually provide that kind of safety to your children. I mean, those are the systemic issues that we see every day, just on a logistical level. And then on top of that, you add in psychological components, you know, that these people have to try to get through, the women and the children in our particular case. I mean, first stage emergency services, 30 days max. You're expected to turn your life around in 30 days. It's unrealistic. You know, you can try to provide them with as many resources and supports as possible, but at the end of the day, it's just not enough, which is another reason why advocacy has been such a prominent thing for us in the last couple of years, and why we're finally seeing a little bit of push through, for sure. For example, the bill that we're expecting to be open by the end of the year in West Kelowna will be a mix of first stage and second stage housing. So emergency housing, for sure, it's always needed. But second stage, I believe it's a year and a half to 2 years, somewhere there. That's a little bit extra.
I've heard 18 months in the past.
Yeah, 18 months, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there was a place in Surrey that I had the privilege of doing some video work for, and a friend of mine, well, actually I work for him now, is very closely connected to it. So I kind of got like a lot more insight to how it works over there, like in a much larger population. But here's something I'm curious about. So you said around the 80s, a lot of this stuff started coming up, a lot of these shelters started popping up. Do we know what was done before that?
Well, women helping women.
So it's just 100%, just like your
100%,
community reached out and just kind of knew what was happening.
Yeah.
So do people not do that as much and just rely on the shelters now?
That's a tough one. It's hard to find statistics surrounding that, because it's more of a social thing. Right?
Yeah, it'd be more anecdotal, I suppose, at this point.
Absolutely, and I think it would also depend on the community, and it would depend on that woman's particular situation. I mean, one of the primary things that we do see is social isolation when it comes to domestic abuse. You know, the woman tends to be very much isolated from any sort of support systems, which is why she ends up having to rely on, you know, public emergency services like ours. Then that's what we're there to be. We realize that a lot of these women don't have family or friends to be able to rely on. It's one of the questions that we ask, actually. Is there somebody that you trust? Is there somebody that you can reach out to? And the fact of the matter is, oftentimes the answer is no. So we're there to step in and be that surrogate friend, I guess, substitute friend or substitute family member who hopefully will be able to help, which is another reason why the short length of time that is provided to these women in order to be able to actually change their lives around, and some of the systemic barriers and the issues that they come up with throughout their journey of trying to find a way out is just so horrific, because she's getting disappointed again and again. It takes it takes tremendous courage to pick up the phone and ask for help from a complete stranger, and then to end up being told either, "Hey, we have no space for you, I'm sorry, but here may be some other resources," even though it was probably extremely difficult to pick up the phone already for this, and then I'll go call 5 other agencies and see if they'll be able to help you, and then on top of that, even if they do arrive and miraculously find space at our facilities, then it's also the issue of like, okay, well, now you have to think about the logistics around finding legal representation for custody of your children, being able to find gainful employment, being able to find a roof above your head. And let's not start down the line of how ridiculously expensive it is to rent anything in this town.
Well, we were just talking about in the middle of summertime, something goes haywire and you had a place. Like, forget getting a second place.
Yeah, exactly.
Something that strikes me is like there's a lot of daily exposure to doom and gloom with like the rawness of human problems that we just have in today's society. And intuitively, I would expect that wears on you to the point that like a holiday isn't a holiday unless like you are exposed to like the good side of the world, or like years after that. Like, I don't even know how you recover from that, but that's just what I imagine. But I'm not in this world. So I should ask someone who actually is there some odd, maybe unexpected, like cheer or joy or hope that you're getting from these kinds of stories? Because like, yeah, from the outsiders, it sounds sad and horrible. And how many times do you see like furrowed brows and like aw expressions, like when you hear about this stuff, but you're like, actually, you should talk to Cynthia. She's a crazy woman. Like, yeah, she's got this stuff going on, but like have a conversation with her and you'll leave like with your gut on fire because you've been laughing so hard. Like, there's got to be some things you don't expect that you get to encounter. For sure.
And especially in this role, it's my first time being exposed directly to the stories of some of the survivors, and as raw and gut-wrenching as they can be, one of the most inspiring things that I've seen so far is just the resiliency of the human spirit in times of struggle. When you hear the success stories, that's one of the things actually that we were discussing internally, is that women's shelters and just nonprofits in general, we're very good at talking about what, like, oh, well, we need to do this and we need to fix that and this isn't good enough. But, once we get a success, we don't blow our own trumpets very well, which is probably not a good thing, because then all you hear, like you said, is about the doom and gloom and, the sad
But doesn't that worry you, though? Like, if you did blow your own trumpet, would they stop donating because they think, oh, they're good now, they're fine, we're good, we had success, we're good, that's it, pack up shop, we're done. Like, that's obviously not the message, but that fear is probably gnawing at you, like, what if we say this is going well?
It's true to a certain extent, but I mean, I'll play devil's advocate to that to a certain bit as well. If you're continuously just hearing about the bad stories, won't a donor at some point go, okay, obviously my money isn't making a difference, because I don't hear anything good coming out of there either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? So you can take it both ways. I don't think that providing an accurate reflection of what's going on in an organization is a bad thing, which is, again, one of the reasons why something like, how many people we turn away every year, I think is a good thing. And yeah, absolutely, we can put that together with the statistics of how many crisis calls we receive and how many referrals we have and how many women and children we found housing for, and how many counseling sessions and group sessions we've had for our children and youth programs, how many students we've impacted in schools Absolutely. You need a very healthy balance of both, in my opinion, for sure.
What do you do for blowing your own trumpets? Like, it doesn't happen very much, but like, what's
No.
what's the outlet? Well, how do you do that?
Mainly social media,
like-
I would say, but word of mouth, and that's one of the key things that has been extremely successful. The authenticity of being able to meet somebody who says, I've seen this and it works. You know, I've been a part of this, and
Like people who have graduated from the system?
that donors who have, you know, been privy to some of the stories of how their funding has impacted, you know, the work that we do. I'm very much a believer in just people. You know, you can get your marketing and your social media up to snuff, you know, as much as you want, but what's really going to be moving is when you can show somebody what it is that you do.
Yeah, it's pretty special whenever you actually do get like an insight to some organizations like massive success, especially with something kind of risky.
Absolutely.
Like, I got to be in the room when there was a very heated conversation regarding a wet house going in Rutland.
Oh, you were there.
I was filming it. Oh man, I couldn't believe the conversations. Like, it was incredibly enlightening.
Yeah.
I wish more people had the time
Yes.
to devote to having listened to that entire thing.
Exactly.
For obvious reasons, the whole thing couldn't be posted. I ended up shooting that, and then shooting like a screening later on that was a documentary that somebody made about her experience with some homeless people in Vancouver and Victoria. It was a really, really cool day. 'Cause it's like that full circle, like go and see it here in this city, and then hear about like a polished, shortened version of someone else's journey over the course of 2 years, trying to understand it and do something about it in a different city that was close by. Like, it was very cool. But yeah, like just hearing the kind of things that happen or not happen, hearing the kinds of conversations that happened, and points of like not outrage but contention between some people who have and some people who have not experienced being in those places.
Absolutely.
It was very strange and very enlightening.
But I feel like those situations are exactly what need to happen, perhaps a little bit more often, which is again why I'm very much I'm always going to cheer for the human one-on-one experience, because there's so much in our technical age that distracts us. You know, you look at social media and websites, and you know we're thinking of new ways to try to get those split couple 3 to 5 seconds of attention, just to say, hey, I'm here, I'm right here, you know. And for a nonprofit, when you don't have as much funding to apply towards your marketing, I mean, what else are you going to rely on but the people? Think maybe if we shut off from our technology a little bit and just focus on having those conversations at your local level a little bit more.
How dare you suggest such a crazy thing?
I'm sorry. I know, talking to people? Psh, no. Tragedy.
I got to be honest. I love talking to people.
Yeah.
I've grown
Really?
less fond of it. I know, right? I've grown less fond of it
Why?
because I just don't do it as much. Like in the last year and a half, especially in the last 6 months, like easily the majority of my time is spent in this building. Easily.
Yeah.
It's
But then you
hard.
become
It's hard to get out and
siloed in
talk
your
to
own
people.
thoughts. And I think that that's one of the reasons. I mean, lately, for many reasons, societally, politically, we're on a trend right now of being very divisive in our words and our thoughts and our approaches to things. And that's never helpful.
Division has always been a mark of determining which camp you are and which one you aren't in.
For sure.
But you are very accurate though on the one thing you're saying about like becoming like lost in your own silo of thought. And another word for that would be echo chamber, when you're in like a room of people who all are lost in their own thoughts, but they're all like the same collective thought.
Yes.
And sometimes that creates like a paradigm of the world and how it works that's not even close to accurate, but it's all that's being reinforced on a daily basis, and that becomes your outlook.
Absolutely.
And that happens in all kinds of environments. And I was in one of those that I'm very happily not in anymore. A few of them actually.
Right.
But it becomes a source of identity.
Yes. Yeah.
And it sometimes is related to what you do.
Yes.
So I'm actually curious, with being in the nonprofit sector, if I can call it that. Or is that too callous? I know some
No,
people.
not at all.
I know a friend of mine. He absolutely no, not he doesn't. He loves saying it.
Yeah.
But he works in early childhood education.
Okay. Yeah.
And I forget what he calls it, like childhood industry or daycare industry or like something industry.
Right.
And his boss is furious every time he says
because
that.
it's not an industry. Yeah.
No,
yeah,
it's like, we're not an industry. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
how dare you say that? It's like, it's
too
just
corporate.
a word.
Yeah,
It means what I mean it to say. And they just have a good time about that. But people within the nonprofit sector, nonprofit industries, shelters, whatever you want to call it, insert term here. Is there an echo chamber that you witness on a daily basis of like people becoming kind of calloused into a frame of thinking?
Potentially. I mean, it's
like you probably would have recognized it shortly after leaving the corporate world, is my guess.
no, and well, yes and no. So the one thing again that I've noticed with nonprofits is the uncanny ability to motivate purely based on those intrinsic values. And if you want to call that an echo chamber, then by all means go right ahead, because
Well, what do you mean by motivated by intrinsic values?
There is a very big focus on the result and just the purpose of the work that you do. People don't go into nonprofit to make money. Are you kidding me? You know, like that's not why you're there. You're there because you want to make a difference. Now that doesn't mean that you can get away with paying somebody who's in a nonprofit environment, you know, something below a livable wage, because there's this thing called a hygiene factor of of money that you should be able to provide to your staff in order for them to not feel worried about paying their bills. But one thing that nonprofits are I found very good at is it's not a rat race. It never will be, because you're all there to work together for a common purpose, and you're all there to learn, and you're there to better yourselves and the world around you in general, and whatever social little structure you've seen or decided to focus on. The one silo maybe that I would say you can kind of put yourself in when you're in a nonprofit environment is that feeling of discontent in having to argue for your cause over and over and over again, and feel sometimes like nobody's listening. You know,
but then you've got the motivation of the intrinsic value to bring you back up and keep you going.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that you can absolutely, and I see it being applied to the corporate world a lot more now. I think that organizations that maybe aren't nonprofits or not even social enterprises realize that your values, it's the person job fit, right? So even in a corporate structure or a corporate organization, you still need to have people who believe in what it is that you do. You're never going to, there's no amount of money in the world that is going to be, you know, the highlight of like, yes, I've reached the pinnacle of how much I'm supposed to be earning. Not to say that it's not a motivator. For some people it's a lot bigger motivator, but there's always something else behind it. There's always something else that's tied into it, and that's where you can find your success and you find your tribe, so to speak, you know, and that's something, it's one of the main reasons that I went into organizational psychology as in terms of my education, is because I was just so fascinated with what it is that motivates people to work, to continue working, how fragile a worker can be sometimes in terms of how quickly they can lose motivation, or the will to work in a specific role or a specific company purely due to a lack of value in their work or poor leadership, or maybe all of that is in place but the structure is just not well suited, and it ends up causing more problems than it does help them in being able to achieve the work that they do, and then it just gets frustrating.
Do you find that fragility is more prevalent in the young and dumb or the dusty and rusty?
Ooh, here we go into generational factors.
Well, I'm just thinking about it. Like, if you've been in it for a while and you've never seen the system be any different than what you ever knew it to be, would that become more demoralizing or disheartening? Or like if you're young and you're excited and you're going to go make your difference and you're emotionally driven and that intrinsic value is like in the forefront of your mind, and then you get hit with these repeated wait, who are you again? You need money again this year? And all the other kinds of things. Like,
I would say
I don't know.
It's funny because I do a training on generational differences in the workplace and how to help them come together in actually achieving whatever it is that you're working on. I think that there is a very big benefit in mixing generations in any workplace, regardless of whether you're a nonprofit, corporate, or something in between. I don't like utilizing some of those stereotypes in age differences because
Well, they're not stereotypes. It's more like which one do you witness more?
Both. I've seen young and dumb behavior in older people, and I've seen some very steady, loyal behavior in some of the younger ones as well. I think that one of the reasons that I ended up being very interested in that is because I don't fall into the category of a millennial very easily. You know, I'm a little bit more. I'm a little bit more willing to be loyal to an organization than most peers my age. And I think that it falls down to not just individual differences, which are always going to be a lot more important than whatever generation it is that you fall into, but there are certain things that collective experiences through generations that we've witnessed. You know, older generations, I find they have this sense of expectation of loyalty with nothing in return sometimes in their work, because they grew up in the atmosphere of, if you are a good employee in this one company, you have your pension, you're set for life, you work for that company for the rest of your life, and that's it, which is not a reality anymore for our generation. I mean,
that old model is proven to be not nearly as sound a foundation as we once thought it was.
Absolutely. And even in generations prior to ours, the norm was to continuously kind of job hop from corporation to corporation, but at least you were still in your same industry. Now, everybody's got a side hustle. That's the norm now. Now you have your bread and butter, but you also have to do something, plan A, B, C, D, who knows what letter of the alphabet you are on next, just in order to try to stay alive and keep up with the ever-changing circumstances of our employment. So what I definitely find is that younger employees do have a tendency to say, hey, this is reciprocal. This isn't me being loyal to you just because you're boss. I want to see what value I'm getting out of this first and foremost. Yeah, the money's great, but there's also that extra part of, you know, I want to be valued for my work, and I also want to see the results of it at the end, and that it's not just putting money into boss man's pocket.
I want to think that that's a more virtuous way of looking at it than just blindly trusting that as long as I stick to this, like, they're going to be fine. Like, actually standing up for yourself and questioning that. I think that's not a bad thing.
No.
But just curious again about, I keep on pulling it back to, like, going from corporate to nonprofit. Did you find that you had any qualities that were exceptionally useful that other people didn't necessarily possess or have the time being trained in for when you joined?
Yes, I think that I definitely utilize a lot of, as much as I can at least, I utilize a lot of business practices in my daily job as a development manager. I think that sometimes individuals who have solely worked in nonprofit environments, because they know that it's a different beast from any sort of corporate environment, they tend to assume that it functions on a different set of rules, and it does to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, it's a business, and there's a budget, and there's a balance that needs to be maintained, and there are certain expenses that need to be covered, and there are certain approaches that I will use and apply that might be seen as not very nonprofit-esque, because I know that they're important. And one of them is, I find it personally a lot more ethical to be very blunt with a donor. I'm not going to try to maintain a donor charity relationship with somebody who might not be a good fit. And for organizations, nonprofits that are sometimes always under the gun, I absolutely can understand that feeling. You know, you're under pressure to find where the next dollar is coming from. Sometimes you're kind of willing to shift and bend to the pressures of maybe a donor who is a little bit more demanding than others. You know, if they have, I've had donors who say, okay, well, I would like this money to go towards your shelter, but I want it to go specifically towards this kind of group training that'll focus on this subject, you know. And you can be, as somebody who works on trying to find, you know, where the next dollar is coming from, you can be tempted to say, okay, I'll make that work, you know. But really what you're doing in that circumstance is just making more work for yourself and for the staff that are going to have to eventually implement that, and you still haven't funded the thing that you actually need to fund. And that's when it comes down to just sitting down, having a very frank conversation with them about the business aspects of the organization, where the money is actually needed and why it functions in the way that it does. If the donor is not willing to look at you as the subject matter expert in the specific topic that you have been tasked with providing service for the last 40 years, then they're not the right fit for your organization. And it is better to be very open and say, I can't do that, but I can do this. And if you're willing to fund me for that, then I'll gladly take it. If not, then that is absolutely fine. I'm more than happy, actually. I've done it on several occasions, is suggesting other charities that might be a better fit. And that's something that I have also utilized, you know, my business acumen for. There is no point in trying to fight each other for a funder. There's more than enough money to go around. It's everywhere. It's fine. You'll find it. I would much rather collaborate with another like-minded nonprofit in splitting the work or splitting the funding, because it also shows to the funder then that I'm not going to duplicate efforts unnecessarily. There are other professionals in, you know, those side paths that could probably help our services, but they're better at it than we are, because our focus is this and their focus is something adjacent to that but not quite. And I would much rather partner with them than try to pretend like I can do a better job just in order to get somebody else's funding. Right,
because at the end of the day that becomes more expensive for you anyways, because now you have to allocate that to something that you don't necessarily focus on as much.
Yeah,
it kind of sounds like these donors occasionally are more work than a board of directors that conflicts
depends on
with...
the board.
Yeah, it depends on the board. Some can be a dream, some can be a different kind of dream. That idea of referring people on to other charities if what they're wanting you to do isn't as good a fit versus what they do, it actually aligns very closely with what some business people that I've been following on social media have promoted. Don't know if you're familiar at all with a YouTube channel called The Future. It's also a company. The guy maybe. Chris Doe, he is like the face of it, and yeah, he talks a lot about like aligning your values with your clients and. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good practices from the business world that apply to the nonprofit. I'm curious, from your experience, have you seen that those principles are taught in a different lens, or a lot of them that you feel would be helpful or very powerful just aren't there because the need that derived their creation isn't there because it's nonprofit versus for profit?
From the trend that I've seen locally, at least here, I shouldn't say that. I have an inkling suspicion that it's probably like this across the country. Business is something that usually has a set structure in terms of how you're taught. You know, most often it's just like you get your BBA and then your MBA and then, you know, like there's some sort of structure in your head in terms of where you're going to go to learn about what it takes to run a business. I'm not saying that all business owners or successful entrepreneurs have gone down that path, because that is not true to any extent at all. But there is a path, an educational path that you can follow in order to get the basics. For nonprofit management, that's a very niche subject. There ain't no MBA for it, you know. And I find that, I mean, there is, but it's not very popular. And I find that most people
It's
tend
like an arts degree.
it is a little bit. I find
Except
that
you could actually get paid for it.
right. Depends. But I find that most people just fall into nonprofit work, which is why you get this very interesting hodgepodge of people who just come from all sorts of varying different backgrounds and have stayed, again, because they believe in what it is that they do. And that can sometimes be a little bit of a detriment as well, of course, because there is no structure where you will have gone through an experience like I have where, you know, I learned corporate first and then had to transition into nonprofit, which was a whole mind scramble for sure. Because I'm like, what do you mean I can't do this? Why can't I do that? A business can do that. Well, we can't do that because of CRA. Okay. You know, there's lots of that stuff. That
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of more red tape, isn't there?
Very
that you
much.
don't necessarily. You're right. There's no schooling for it, so you kind of have to bump into those walls to find them.
Absolutely. Everybody's learned along the way. And I mean, you know, experience is the best educator. But at the same time, it can be a little bit jarring, and you learn by mistakes, and you learn as you go along, and there's never enough people, and there's never enough money, and there's never enough time, you know, so you just kind of learn as you go along, for sure. But I would say that you definitely have more of an ability to hyper focus on some aspects of a business in a corporate environment than you do in a nonprofit. In a nonprofit, most staff will be kind of jack of all trades type roles, for sure. Like, you go wherever you're needed and you do whatever it takes.
Something I'm curious about is you mentioned the whole, like, back to the whole, like, if you've sometimes refer people on to other charities, like, what you want to do is not necessarily what's in line with our vision and values, but theirs is, so you should talk to them or whatever. And then the whole, like, falling into charities, like, you kind of you land on it because of whatever your motivation or your driving forces for yourself personally. What's the networking world like? Like, how well do charities and nonprofits know about each other? Like, they know of each other, but how well do they know each other?
From personal experience, I try to network with other like-minded charities as much as possible. It's not really very much of a norm, because you're so focused on what it is that you do that you just don't have time. I would say that's the excuse that I'd give them, at least. But that relationship.
I mean, like, even businesses have, like, their once every quarter, like, networking event or whatever. It's like between like 5 companies. So, yeah,
right. It's just whoever's in the Landmark building.
Yeah, pretty much.
I can say that now because our office is in the Landmark. But yeah, I would say that even pre-COVID, you know, going to things like Business 5 After 5s, nonprofits are a little bit of the lost sheep there, because we're not really offering a service of any kind. You know, are you in need? Are you being abused? Call my number.
Well,
or give me money, like, either way.
You're in the service of goodwill.
Yeah.
Would you like some goodwill? Come to us. We can give you some of that.
It's a different kind of pitch, right? It's a very, very much a different kind of pitch. Personally, yes. Yeah, we do a lot of network building with other local organizations, especially in a situation like ours where we can't be everything to our residents and our clients and the people who access our services. You have to have that network of resources, because the last thing that you want to do is to tell them, well, I don't know. Well, where can I get help for it? Well, I don't know. What a heartbreak, right? That's one of the reasons that I really admired the Foundry's little structure when that opened up, is multiple charitable organizations, nonprofit, social enterprises, professionals, anybody who would be able to offer services in the broad spectrum of what youth mental health looks like, was able to come to a central hub. And I think that is a fantastic model, because somebody who is looking for help is just going to walk in through those doors and say, I need help with these things, and it's all there. It's all in one spot. You know, it's all accessible. Maybe it's on different days, but you're not doing what so many charities, including ours, have to do right now, where, okay, for your emergency shelter services, you come to us, but then for your free legal counseling, you go over there, and then also for your child, you go over here, and then in order to find a job, you go to this fifth place. You know, you're getting tossed around so much that you just... it's yet another barrier to being able to actually get out of a situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a demoralizing thing when you think about, like, when you're hit rock bottom and you're asking for help, and then you get for this department, please press.
No.
Like, kill me now.
Right, exactly.
Sorry to use those terms,
no,
but
but
I mean,
it's
the way you feel sometimes.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, I'd love a cheese grater on my face, because that sounds so much more fun.
Absolutely. And you can imagine if somebody is in an actual, you know, dangerous situation, they only have a couple of minutes to talk to you at that point because they just happen to have access to a phone at that moment. And it's sometimes scary when, you know, we get those hang-up calls and there's no way to dial back, and you know that there's somebody out there who needs you and can't access you. I mean, those are my toughest days. And it's why when I look at the work that our frontline staff do on a daily basis, like, thank God I'm in an office, because I don't know if I could do that every day. It's why I went into the industry the way that I did, is because I knew there was no way that I could leave that at home. Like, or leave that at work. I'm taking it home with me. You know, I'm not very good at compartmentalizing when it comes to things like that, you know. I definitely take work home, and if that's what's going to be my day-to-day, holy hell, you know.
Yeah, I've heard from a couple of EMS workers about, like, sometimes it's just one thing, and they go from rock solid to, I can't deal with this anymore, and I'm out. Yeah. And sometimes that's on day one, and sometimes, like, after the years of training, and then day one happens, and it happens to be a brutal day, and it's like pulling half a body that's still alive from a burning building, and it's like, I'm out. I can't do this. You can be trained for it theoretically all you want, but it's different when it hits you and you're there. Yeah, I definitely marvel at what our frontline staff do, which is one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about the work that I do, is because, okay, I can't do direct service, hell no. But what I can do is make sure that at least they don't have to think about whether they have enough funding for the amount of staff that we need. You know, that they're going to be alone for a certain number of hours. No, you're not. We're going to be double staffed all the time. Or, you know, do I have enough money to give this particular person, you know, a gift card to go and shop for groceries or something? Like, yes, you absolutely have. You know, don't worry about that. I got you covered on the back end. I got you covered on the administrative part. I'll make sure to get the money. But, you know, you do the work that you do. And what I'm very happy about is that lately I've been seeing a trend even in our donors of remembering that our staff need help too when you're working in those kinds of roles. You know, we had a wonderful funder. What was it? It was Frilly Lily, locally. Frilly Lily?
Frilly Lily. It's a nail salon. And they wanted to donate like a manicure or pedicure to all of our staff. Just little things like that. You know, it was something that really touched our staff quite a bit, because we're often forgotten. You know, we're lucky that somebody is willing to fund our wages, to actually have a donor go out of their way to acknowledge the fact that we need a little bit of pampering every once in a while as well. I mean, it goes so far to in helping promote that feeling of, okay, people see me. I'm doing good things, and they know that I am, and I'm here, and I don't feel like I'm doing all of this work and nobody knows, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like to think about, like, the human aspect of, like, yeah, you're going day in, day out, you've got that intrinsic value motivation that pushes you to keep on doing it, but every once in a while it's okay to have an early Christmas.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I would say is definitely an unfortunate barrier in working for a nonprofit. I mean, if we were to show our budget that we blew, like, I don't know, $1,000 on you know, splurging on something for our staff, it doesn't look good for a nonprofit. A business can do that. A social enterprise can do that. You can hold a party for however, you know, much you want. You know, you can blow as much money as you want on your staff in terms of providing that, you know, those gifts of acknowledgement of saying like, yes, I see you, and you know what, I want you to enjoy tonight, or however, you know. But as a nonprofit, that looks bad. That looks bad. You're in the red all of a sudden.
Those funds could have gone to so many more better causes.
Exactly. And that's, you know, from a PR perspective, from a funding perspective with CRA, in terms of how much of your money is going to administrative costs versus the cause itself. You know, it's why I really do think that social enterprise is the way to go. You know, I think that every corporation is to a certain extent, in one form or another in the future, going to be veering towards that, because it's utilizing business practices. It provides you the freedom of being able to organize your budget the way that you can, and get as much staff as you need, and recognize them appropriately, you know, and pay them well, and cover all of your expenses. And then the surplus goes towards the cause, right? And what I love about that structure as well, and that model, is that as a consumer, you get to choose where you're going to be spending your money for things like where you get your cup of coffee, which mechanic you're going to be going to service your car at. You get to choose with your day-to-day spending what you would like to support out in the local community.
That's a good point. Like, there's a couple, I don't know of that many places like that around here, but one that immediately jumps to mind is Teen Challenge, with like their car program, where they'll like do repairs to cars, and they'll take old cars, they'll fix them up, and they'll sell them again, and that helps fund the whole program. Like, that's a brilliant idea, but and unless you have the people that can sustain that sort of thing, like, it doesn't really work. But then in order to get the people to sustain that sort of thing, you need to have some kind of motivation or incentive for them to stick around and go to you instead of joining the rat race.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I suppose it's nice to have that good fuzzy feeling while you're at work, but then if you run it like a social enterprise, then you can actually, as you say, like, you can do the things that businesses do. You can treat your staff, you can pay them the way that you want to, and whatever else. But then you're also taking profits.
You can hold revenue. You can grow off of the successes of the previous year instead of being expected to start from zero every time. And I think that personally, to me, is the most frustrating thing. Because, you know, I know that my budget grows every year in terms of what we need, but there's only so much that I can transfer over. Like, if I've had a good fundraising year, that's bad. If I've over fundraised, that's bad.
That's such a weird thing.
Like, you have to hit, the expectation is that you hit zero. You're at zero every year, you know? And then who the hell is, that's not good for a business. You know, a business never does that. You don't aim for zero, you know. No, you aim for more so that you have leverage in order to be able to push. And I completely understand why. Because there, have historically been, you know, this is the stuff that I've heard in my youth, you know, before I worked in nonprofits, you know, the horror stories that you hear about, you know, all of the money that was donated, like 90% of it just went to the CEO, and it didn't even go to the cause because, you know, the laws weren't set up properly and all of that jazz, you know. So I think that I can absolutely understand why the general public and donors in particular are skeptical sometimes of that. But at the same time, being in that environment and into that industry, you find out which organizations are like that very quickly. You know, it just takes a matter of putting in the time and effort of maybe taking like a couple of minutes to research where you want to put your money in. Yeah,
it doesn't really seem like there's that many barriers in between information now. Like, I know there's actually a list. Yeah, a couple of years ago, there was a list that came up of these organizations spend the majority of their donations on administration costs, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And then these are the ones that don't. I was very surprised when I read that list. It was not who I expected it to be.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, like, that information is much more prevalent now than it ever was.
Absolutely. But another thing that you sometimes have to look at, and again, this is something that, you know, most people just, information they wouldn't come across. What counts as an administrative expense?
That's true. Yeah, administrative expense is like, isn't that just whatever it costs to keep this machine moving?
Right.
And then okay.
So is that a program expense or is it an administrative expense? Because if you need this amount of money to keep the machine moving, then you need this amount of money to keep the machine moving. Like, it's not going to work unless you have the underlying structure there.
Right.
So do we still need to be looking at percentages, or are we supposed to be looking at what kind of impact they actually have on the community?
Our staff will not work unless we have the hot tub. That's it. They won't work. They're not going to do it.
Nah.
We need to have
Chocolate.
bubbles in the hot tub,
Yeah, bro,
and it
no.
needs scented water. We cannot do our jobs without it. This is an absolute essential cost.
Sparkling water only out of the taps, not still. And I want a bidet.
I'm thinking we should wrap this up here real quick because
Okay.
like we're an hour 12.
Oh, nice.
But before we do that,
Mhm.
do you want? Okay, so this is something I'm always curious about. Ever
Okay.
since I was first enlightened about this idea, and it totally made sense as soon as I heard about it. Somebody that we both know
Mm-hmm.
asked this with a different frame. They said, "Okay, I'm from a community that has a certain kind of stigmatism about it.
Okay.
Not stigmatism. Stigma. Blah.
I got where you were going.
Anyways, there's a certain stigma about my community, but we make fun of that internally.
Okay.
And in terms of like jokes that no one else is allowed to say because they're so horrible, but we just do it all the time. We find it very funny.
Mhm.
Are there any such jokes in that paradigm that are within the nonprofit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Like,
if we,
just to step on your answer for a quick second, when I left a job,
yeah.
one of my favorite things to say for the last 2 weeks was, what are they going to do, fire me? Like, just very poor taste jokes.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And I think that that's just it's a very good coping mechanism, especially when you're working in a high stress environment. That kind of stuff is just naturally going to come out. And yeah, I would absolutely say in a nonprofit like ours, it's yeah. Yeah. Not ones that I'd be willing to repeat, maybe. But
That's fair
So-
enough. Yes, some things should stay behind closed doors.
Yes.
Is it just enough for me to know that there are some?
Yes, absolutely. But again, it's just it's human. It is human. It is an outlet that you use in order to be able to connect with your peers. It's something that you can only share with this very specific group of people who understand what it is that you're going through, and nobody else will. So of course, yeah, you get those inside jokes and you have some crudeness coming out, you know. Nothing nothing that wouldn't be PC, but you know, like it's crude. It's crude for sure. Yeah.
There actually, while I was saying that, I just remembered. You ever heard of Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, that podcast?
Yes, I have. Yes.
It's so good,
It's
isn't
very
it?
good, yes.
So he does a 4, maybe 5 piece thing on World War One.
Mhm.
It's called something for Armageddon.
Ooh.
Is like the name of the series. But anyways,
Yeah.
the point of it was, I think it was in the second, maybe it was the third installment of it, and he's talking about trench warfare and how the soldiers, like, they're constantly having to dig down because the trenches kept on getting rained on, and
Yeah.
the dirt would come in and have to dig it back
Take it
out.
back up.
But they would dig at different levels because they don't really have like, whoa, we got like 4 inches of rain that brought down like an inch of sediments. We should only dig 1 inch down. Like they didn't have that.
Yeah.
They're just digging because it's full.
By
So,
eyesight, yeah.
but they also couldn't really leave even if people died, so they just buried them further than they were walking, and so they'd keep on unearthing bodies.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and they universally named all of them Bob.
Yes.
So like, hey, I found Bob's hand today, or oh, here's Bob's foot. Oh, damn, Bob's getting in the way all the
Right?
time.
And that's just, it's a coping mechanism, right? What else are you supposed to do? It is a part of the job, for lack of better terms. It is a part of the job, so to speak. So, you know, you dug up Bob today, and it's just your way of coping with it. It's your way of making light of a situation that is not light.
Yeah, and I imagine that also goes pretty far, like, you know, of course, within boundaries.
Yes.
With I don't know if you call them the clients, but the people that
I call them clients. My ED doesn't like it when I do that. They're not clients. They're people. Yes, I know.
Yes,
But
okay,
as
but
far as the funders,
but there's people outside, there's people inside. The people outside are strangers. The people inside are clients.
right?
Sometimes
Clients and
the people outside are other things too.
residents, right?
But anyway,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I think let's call it here because it's going really well, and I
Yeah.
don't like going until it stops
Fantastic.
being fun.
Yes,
But thanks
I
for
love
doing
it.
this.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. This has been a pleasure. It went by really fast.
It did.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.